Lastly, let's talk about creating RPC style calls. And when I'm talking about RPC style calls, I mean ones that are execution based rather than resource based. It may be that you want to insert something or you want to cause some action to happen. It's not just about data, but it is about action. In our case, let's go back to our Visual Studio project and let's create a brand new controller. And I'll call this our diary summary controller. This will be a simple controller where we can do a get against an individual diary date and then get a simple object that's going to represent the summarized data for an individual diary day. So let's make some of our standard changes here. Add a constructor. We're going to need to supply some basic information, and so I'll actually copy this from our diaries controller to bring in some namespaces. And so now we have basic construction of our diary summary controller. Let's go ahead and create a public method that's going to return a new object that we're going to call the diary summary model. It's going to be the data that represents an individual day of data. And like our diary, we're going to use the same diary ID to compute that data. And so let's go ahead and do two things. First, let's go ahead and create our model. This is going to be just another class. Let's go ahead and just add a couple pieces of information, like the diary date, let's call it. So the date of that diary, total calories. Because our other models are only returning calories so far, giving it the total calories is fine. Later on, we may return more nutritional information like calcium and protein and fat and sugar and those sorts of things. And so this will be an object that sort of represents the total amount of that sort of data. Now that we have the model, let's include the namespace. We're also going to need to add a route for this. Let's go over to Web API config and let's make yet another route. In this case, I'm going to copy the diaries route. It already has the pattern I want. But in this case, I'm going to call it diary summary. So notice what we're doing is we're pretending that it's actually a part of the diary resource. But we're just adding another association that is just going to be a simple association that's going to act like an RPC or a method call called summary that will return us the data we want. And I'll make sure that's the diary summary controller. And in this case, the diary ID is not optional, so we can just get rid of that. There are no other parameters. We're always going to get the summary for an individual day. So the first thing we'll need is the actual diary. And let's go ahead and put a try-catch around it to be good citizens. And because we're going to do try-catch, we can go ahead and just make sure that we return a HTTP response message. Or if you want to be a little looser, you can actually return an object. And if you do have a catch, you can always say return request.create error response. This way we can actually return our model summary type if we have success. Otherwise, we can use the create response or create error response for exceptional cases later. So let's use the repository to get our diary ID. If it's null, then we can go ahead and return the request.create response not found. Sort of quickly going through this because a lot of this is a repeat of what we've done before. And then finally, we want to be able to produce a diary summary. So I'm going to say return the model factory dot create summary in our case. And we're giving it a method name instead of just saying create, because the creates are really to map an entity type to a model type. And so we're using the fact that we could overload that to sort of marry that. So I need to give it a different name, and create summary is fine, because we might have summaries of other types of operations in our API. Of course, create summary doesn't exist, so I'll generate the method stub, and then let's go navigate to it and make it work. And returning, it's fairly simple. We can just create a new instance of the model, say the diary date is going to be diary.currentDate, and then total calories is just going to be diary.entries.sum. Now the sum is going to be the measure.calories times e.quantity, right? So we're going to just do the calculation to get the total calories here. Let's go over here and go back to our user diaries. There's a diary, and if I just add summary to it, we're now getting the operation that's going to return us some data. This means that the model factory is also going to be the place that I'm going to do some formatting here. So I might not decide that hundreds or thousands of a calorie matter on a daily basis. So it'd be fine for me to just say math.round to make that nice and pretty. So in this way we can create endpoints in Web API that really are functional operations. They're much more like remote procedure call. But because they're inside REST, we still want them to be without side effects or without state. We want them to be as stateless as possible. So you can see that this summary is doing those calculations and returning it, and might even, if those calculations were expensive, decide to cache it. But we're not going to really handle changing state in these RPC style calls. That's what the resources are for, and we should stick with those. I wouldn't do things like insert invoice and have those invoices then do that operation, including the changing of the data. There are times when RPC operations might be useful to kick off certain things. Let's say kick off the rebooting of a server or sending a text message where the data you're returning may just be failure or success, or even something like enqueued with a ticker to come back later and check to see whether the asynchronous operation is complete. So using get or post or any of the other operations to create RPC style calls is okay, but they should be the exception. This is a good example in my opinion because we have the difference between handling the resources to manipulate data and something that is more functional in nature. And the mix is about right as well. I found that in most projects I've worked on with REST-style interfaces, that a majority of the work is being done in resources, and then there's always those 1, 2, or 3 small little extra pieces that more fit into an RPC-style API. I don't mind mixing them because I want to be pragmatic. Again, trying to get the actual work done, I'm willing to bend some of the rules of REST in order to do that. Let's wrap it all up.